What do innovation professionals actually do? And how do they do it? How do designers create new products, services, strategies, and systems? And how do they overcome barriers to make change happen? Welcome to Idea Work, the podcast about the people, skills, and mindsets behind innovation. I'm Michael Walter, and I'm glad you've joined me. Whether you're starting out in innovation, shifting careers, or just curious, you're in the right place. Let's discover what makes ideas work. Welcome everyone. So in today's episode of Idea Work, we're exploring the phase that comes after Discover phase, which is called the Define phase. This is the Define phase of the Double Diamond design thinking process. In the Discover phase, we spent lots of time researching, interviewing people, gathering data off the internet and reports, and basically making a mess of information about the problem space that we're trying to solve. So in the example that we're working through, this is an example of a client being a university who are wanting to better engage international students with the medical care that they offer. This is a hypothetical situation. And so we explained last episode about the process of doing research. But what you'll find is that you do all this research and you find that you've got this overwhelming amount of information that is all rich and useful, but it's not usable until it's synthesized. So basically the define phase is when you move from the research to being able to actually do something with it and come up with ideas to try and solve it. So we're going to talk briefly about that today. So as mentioned in the last episode, it's not a linear process. The whole Double Diamond isn't a linear process. And you might have found while you were gathering data that you did start to make sense and do some sense making. This might have been that after your interviews, you might have had conversations with the other researchers, sharing what you found so far, what you're sort of starting to think. The key is that it's good to write down these ideas as they happen. And themes will start to emerge, but you don't want to settle on the themes yet. So it's best just to write them down and then continue doing your research. When you've gotten to a point of saturation, then you can start to do your synthesis. So to begin synthesizing, it's useful to put all your insights onto post-it notes. And so this is an activity called Affinity mapping. It's one of the common methods in design thinking. So you grab a whole heap of post-it notes and everyone sits down and silently writes down data points on these post-it notes. This could be quotes that were interesting. It could be statistics. It could be things that you found through your research. The key is not to write a single word. The key is to write a sentence. So rather than writing no knowledge of medical facilities, you might write a quote like, I didn't even know that we could access the medical facilities. And you might write something like, students feel overwhelmed by a combination of culture shock, isolation, and general study woes. So both of those sentences are understandable by anyone else in the team. A single word is ambiguous and confusing and not very helpful. Another good point that if you're doing this in person is to use a marker. It could be a Sharpie, so that's readable from a distance. If you're writing with, colored pens or pencils or anything like that, it's difficult to read. And another good tip if you're doing this in person is to use proper post-it note brand, 3M post-it notes. The ones that are cheaper tend to fall off the wall and it's very, very frustrating. Equally, you can do this digitally as well using Miro or Mural. The benefit of doing it online is that you can do it, work on this asynchronously and continue to shape the data and work with it and try and find themes. So you put all your data points onto these post-it notes and then together you start to put them on a wall, and as a group you start to group these post-it notes into themes. So there might be common themes across all the data that you just start to discover. And as a group, you start to group these themes and give sentences to describe these themes and insights. What can happen sometimes is that as you're looking at your data, you get an aha moment, and these are called insights. And these are really great to try and design from. There's no magical formula of how to come to an insight. It's a process of allowing the data to wash over you and read it and share together and have this analytical, creative process of coming to an insight. And so once you have these, one thing that is helpful to differentiate them is to write the insights on a post-it note but have it on its side so it looks like a diamond, and this clearly differentiates them. Another good tip if you're doing this in person is to write them on post-it notes and write the insights on the post-it notes as well rather than writing on the whiteboard, because then it's still flexible and you can still move it around. Always make sure you take photos as you go, especially at the end. If you're moving to a different room, take photos, because if you're at a university or something, the next class will definitely remove them if they need to use that whiteboard. So it's a practice of thematic analysis, but done visually and collaboratively. It's quite a enjoyable process and challenging at times as well. So it's good to give enough time to this process, because this discover phase and this define phase, this first diamond, is really the most important part of the design thinking process. If you can really dedicate enough time to this process, you'll really identify a problem that is worth solving and is interesting and aligned to the data. If you try and rush through this process, you're just going to end up with another app or some AI infused solution. Not that they're bad solutions, it's bad if it's just because that's the next big thing. Another activity you can do in this define phase, another method, is called personas, so creating personas. Now there's lots of discussion because personas can be done very poorly, and they can be used and people could say this is an exact replica of this person, but as we know, every single person is unique and they don't fit stereotypes. Where a persona can be helpful is if you've got lots of different data and you have the demographics of the background, and you're noticing from your data that there are some trends in the way that people present. So it could be that some people from international student background are very homesick, while some are actually quite outgoing and adventurous. And so you might make two different personas, and you collate the data and put together, capture things like demographics, what their dreams, what they're hoping for, what their pain points are, the environmental factors, needs and frustrations, quotes and representative behaviors. It's all these sorts of things, and it's a way of visualizing the data in a way that's a bit more human-centered. And so once you've created these artifacts, that's the name of these outputs of these sorts of methods, you can come back to those personas at different points during the process to remind yourself of who you're designing for. In the Substack, I've put together some templates you can use for persona development, as well as some articles critiquing it. So I think that's really, with design, so much of it is having a critical mind, both of the process you're going through and the things that you're trying to do, and being critical about the things you're trying to design, but also being critical of the design process itself. These are all just abstract representations of the design process. So there are flaws within the double diamond, there are flaws within IDEO's approach, there's flaws within any sort of approach. And it's just about learning it, practicing it, and then being critical and slowly working out your own approach and adding to the methods that are available. All of these were once just an idea that someone had while they were designing, and have become more commonplace. So we come now to, we've analysed the data, we've synthesised the data. We're now getting a bit clearer about the ideas behind, and not the ideas, the information and what it means, and ways that we can work with this data. And one of the last things we can do in this defined stage and phase is called the how might we question. Now this is actually really quite tricky, I find, and different people have different skills. So some people find this really enjoyable. I find it a bit tricky. It's kind of like crafting together a question, a short open-ended question that reframes the problem space into a prompt for ideation. So it always starts with how might we, and then it has the question. Now I want to read from a great book called confidence. And this is from the Tom and Kelly and David Kelly. So they're the founders of IDEO, and in fact developed a lot of these tools and frameworks. And it was through a friend of theirs that they developed the How Might We question. So this is how they describe the different three words. So the how suggests that improvement is always possible, that the only question remaining is how we will find success. The might temporarily lowers the bar a little, allows us to consider wild or improbable ideas instead of self-editing from the very beginning, giving us more chance of a breakthrough. And the we establishes ownership of the challenge, making it clear that not only will it be a group effort, but it will be our group. And so, for example, there's a few tricks. You're taking your problem statement and rephrasing it in such a way that it's a bit more positive in its framing, rather than being this negative place, which is really tricky. The how makes it its possibility that we will work out something, and it's together. We're going to do this together. We're going to try and solve this together. And might just lowers the bar, makes it a bit safer, that we're not just, it makes it a bit easier to come up with ideas because we're not making it a pressured thing. So I like the way that they frame it back. So that was on page 199. And then on page 238, they have this great example of the different styles of how might we question. So for example, they might have a gripe, which is something that's negative. And the example they give is, it's so noisy around here that I have trouble concentrating. So you don't want to make a challenge question, like a how might we question that's too similar. And a question that's too similar might be something like, how might we reduce noise so you don't have trouble focusing? So it's too similar to the problem statement. One that's too narrow is, how might we create more private offices so employees can concentrate better? So you can see that's too narrow because it's inserted a solution into the question. Private offices is the solution of inserted into the question. It means that you can only come up with ideas around private offices rather than making it a bit broader. A challenge that's too broad would be, how might we help people focus? This is very broad. Like, what are you focusing on? Where are you focusing? Who's this? Who's the person? Who are you designing for? It's too broad, and it means that it will be very difficult to come up with ideas. And one that's just right is, how might we design the space to accommodate a range of working styles? So this is a bit broader, not too specific, that there can be enough ideas, but not overwhelmingly lots of space for lots of ideas. So you can either start from a negative, or you could do a positive. So like a dream is, an example of a dream what might be, I wish our staff got their expense reports in time. And so this is just a process they have where it's like you find gripes, so things that are negative, and dreams are things that people want, are looking for. So structure that often works is, how might we verb, so it might be support, help, and then you might have help who's the person you're designing for. So in this case it might be international students, but equally we could design something for the staff of the medical facilities or the university. And the next part is to, and then you say do what is the action? So it could be find and discover the medical facilities through the website, so that they can live a healthy life while studying overseas in Australia. So that's how might we, adjective. Next one is help who, to do what, so that they can why. So examples, how might, one is too narrow, is how might we build an app to help students book appointments? You can see that the app is a solution that's just been shoved into the how might we question, and will really limit our thinking. And this is a really common problem that we have when we're trying to make how might we questions. We try and shove in the solution into the question. One that's too broad might be, how might we improve health services for everyone? It's too broad. We're not really considering everyone at the moment. We're focusing on international students or the staff that support them in the medical facilities. One that's just right is, how might we support international students to confidentially access medical health support so they can focus on their studies? Now, the how might we question is going to be drawn from your research. From your research, you might have discovered that the international students would access these medical support, but they just don't know that it's available. Therefore, if that was one of the key insights that you had, it won't necessarily be focused on international students. It might actually be focused on the marketing of these services to international students. So the question might be, how might we support university staff to better market and advertise health services to international students so that they can have more international students accessing the services? So you can see that the problem statement and the how might we statement doesn't always resolve around the end user. The end user might be someone else in the system. And so it's like kind of similar to the affinity mapping. You need to take time to really work out the best question. It could be 45 minutes that you take to do this. And I think that when I start interviewing people, I will ask them what's their process with the how might we question, because it is a challenging process. Some people are very good at it, but it is challenging, and it's worthwhile finding out strategies of how to do this well. You can read up, I'll put some more resources around the how might we question in the Substack. So this is gradually coming to the next phase. We're meeting the pointy end of the define phase, where we've got some how might we questions that we want to pivot from into ideation. And you'll find that once you come up with a really good how might we question, you really just want to start coming up with ideas of how to solve it, because it frames it in such a way that it's positively opportunistic, possible that we can actually come up with a solution. So I hope this has been helpful in exploring the define phase of the double diamond design thinking process. I look forward to chatting with you about ideation in the next episode. Great. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to today's show. Make sure you subscribe to keep track of all the episodes, and I look forward to having you here again. Have a great day.